Hello, everybody, and welcome to Independent Sector's June monthly policy update. Capitol Hill heats up for nonprofits. If we haven't met yet, my name is Travis Swanson. I am Independent Sector's new government relations manager. And as I just said, I'm still somewhat new to this community myself. I started with Independent Sector last month. So if we haven't had an opportunity to meet yet, I'm looking forward to meeting you and working together in this new role that I'm in. Also, if this is your first time on an IS webinar, welcome. Independent Sector is a national nonprofit organization representing a diverse set of nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs working to ensure that all people in the United States thrive. As part of our webinar feature, all lines are currently muted, and we will pause periodically for questions. To ask a question, please type your question into the Q&A box. If you have technical difficulties, please email publicpolicy@independentsector.org. Don't worry, I'll put that in the chat for you. This webinar is usually a monthly benefit of IS members. So if you are not a member and you want to find out more about joining us next month and becoming part of this community, I hope you will reach out to membership@independentsector.org. Before I start, I want to respectfully acknowledge that I am joining you today from Washington, D.C., the ancestral home of the Piscataway people who are still in the area and working to reclaim their land and traditional practices. I also want to acknowledge that many of the buildings and places that we inhabit in Washington were built by enslaved people. Wherever you're joining us from, we're glad to have you here today. I'm joined today by Wes Cullum, our trusted colleague and managing director at Washington Council Ernst & Young. And without further ado, I will pass the mic over to Wes for his Capitol Hill updates.
Great. Thanks, Travis. Appreciate that introduction. Also, Heather Mead, partner with Washington Council as well, will join me today. Maybe we should get off and just give a quick update on where things are, what's happening, where things stand in the Senate and the House. The House is in this week and then out next week for the July 4th break. And they're back in for a couple of weeks in July, and then out again for the break in August. So they have only a few weeks before the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, get some things done, especially the appropriations bill. Maybe a place we'll start. So the appropriations process is underway quite aggressively in the House. The House has passed one appropriations bill thus far for the military construction and VA funding, and they have three appropriation bills on the floor this week: Homeland Security, State and Foreign Operations, and Defense. They're going through a series of amendments on those bills today with the hopes of finishing those up tomorrow to finish up the week before they break the July 4th recess next week. As you know, the overall funding levels for the House appropriation process have been set by Chairman Cole at roughly about a 6% reduction in non-defense appropriations levels from the previous set levels from last year. So that's, looking at the appropriations process, these bills have been, for the most part, partisan and supported only by Republicans, with Democrats pushing for more funding in various areas on those bills. We also have two appropriation markups taking place today: the Appropriations Committee on Labor, HHS, and Transportation, HUD, and then two more markups tomorrow, also in the Appropriations Committee on two more appropriations bills. So Chairman Cole has said he's trying to get all the appropriations bills done and pass out of committee and through the House by the August recess. We'll see if they can make that time frame and get that done, but it looks like he's on track thus far in passing those bills out of committee and on the floor, at least the ones on track for this week. On the Senate side, the appropriations process is pretty much unclear. They have not announced Chairman Murray and Senator Collins are the two leaders of that committee over on the Senate side. They have not announced a deal on funding levels for their appropriations bills or a timeline to move appropriations bills to the Senate. If you recall, last year, the Senate was a little bit ahead of the House in moving their bills on a bipartisan basis, and this year the Senate is behind the curve and behind the House on moving appropriations bills. So hopefully they'll get that deal together. They'll start moving appropriations bills in the Senate as well the next several months. In any event, it doesn't look like they're going to pass any appropriations bills through the House and Senate and the President's desk by the September 30th deadline. So we're expecting them to once again pass a CR to push that issue into probably November or December time after the elections are completed and take place. That's the kind of the appropriations process, kind of where things stand. I know people are following that quite closely as well. On the tax front, I think we've kind of talked about this before. The House passed a tax bill from earlier this year that has some business provisions that expired or are modified, as well as the expansion of the child tax credit. The Democrats included in part of that package on a bipartisan basis with Chairman Smith in the House and Chairman Wyden in the Senate has been stalled. It passed the House, but Senate Republicans have objected to the package without additional changes, and therefore the bill is basically stalled in the Senate. There has been some pressure on Leader Schumer to call up the bill for a vote in the House or in the Senate, I mean, but that's unclear whether he's going to do that or not. I think indications are he might do that for a test vote sometime before they leave the August recess. My guess, unless they make changes to the bill to pass by Republicans on the Senate side, that vote will fail, and the bill will not move any further in the legislative process, this year, or at least this work period. We also want to kind of, I think, let you know that there's been some bills in the House Ways and Means Committee that you've seen in previous reports. The House Ways and Means Committee did pass out of committee several bills dealing with nonprofit grant reporting of foreign grants, also legislation to require reporting of foreign contributions to nonprofits. And those bills have been passed out of the Ways and Means Committee and have not been scheduled yet for any sort of consideration in the House, in the full House. A couple of those bills did pass out with a overwhelming bipartisan basis. The foreign grants reporting bill, for example, so it could be a candidate to be considered in the full House at some point in the future. Talking to the folks on the Senate side, they are not. The Senate Finance Committee is not looking into these issues or taking up these bills or having similar bills in the Senate side at this time, and don't expect them to take these bills up if they pass the House or do their own markup on these bills in the near future. I think looking ahead a little bit on the tax agenda, there's been lots of conversation about what happens in 2025. As you know, a number of the 2017 tax cuts expire in 2025. Most notably, all the individual lower tax rates will expire in 2025, precipitating a big, massive tax increase unless Congress acts on those extensions. So both the House and the Senate have begun, working groups and tax teams to kind of examine and look at the provisions for 2025, what expires, what they might do about that. In the House, they've set up 10 different tax teams on a Republican basis. They're holding various team meetings to hear from stakeholders about various aspects of the 2025 tax debate, get kind of geared up to educate members on the issues, have people kind of weigh in on proposals they want to see included in that tax bill in 2025. The Senate is also doing some working groups, more on an informal basis, less public. What the House is doing, there are meetings taking place with Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats separately at the time, for the time being, on discuss issues that come up or will come up in the 2025 tax debate. So that's kind of dominating the conversation in the tax sphere at the moment, looking into 2025. Obviously, with the elections coming soon, lots of attention is on the elections and the polls. Obviously, you have the debate tonight with President Biden and former President Trump having their first debate tonight in Atlanta. Obviously, that'll kind of kick off more conversations with members and the press. You obviously have members also in very tight races in the Senate, in the House, campaigning aggressively. So we're kind of seeing lots of political activity permeating the legislative process in the House and Senate. So we're seeing probably more political votes taking place in the Senate and the House on different issues going forward. So maybe I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions. Maybe turn over to Heather for any additional comments or suggestions to add about the legislative update.
I think that was a great update, Wes. Why don't we start with questions and then we can add in from there.
Yeah, good.
And as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can drop them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen.
Well, one thing I did while waiting for questions, item I did fail to mention was the American Data Privacy Act, the privacy legislation that was scheduled to be marked up today in the House Energy and Commerce Committee was abruptly canceled this morning at 10 o'clock due to objections and concerns raised by the House Republican leadership to the bill that Chairman Morris Rogers put out and was ready to mark up. So that markup of that bill was canceled today. We'll see if it gets rescheduled. It doesn't look like it's going to be rescheduled anytime soon, given the concerns that the Republican leadership has with some of the issues and provisions of that bill. And kind of we'll be watching that would actually impact the sector and the members of the nonprofit sector, as that bill would impact and apply to nonprofits and protect your data privacy issues going forward.
One of the big pieces in the cancellation of that, Wes, as you mentioned, was that private right of action. And one of the things that would have been interesting for our nonprofits is that the same concerns that were raised for the really large companies that were concerned also would have applied to nonprofits, which includes sort of two components. One, there's sort of this enhanced FTC oversight, which would have also applied to nonprofits to whom the bill applied. Then also there was a specific requirement you mentioned that was a private right of action that would have allowed individuals whose data was compromised in ways that are prohibited by the bill to have actually filed an individual suit for damages that were allowed by the legislation. And so that was really a big sticking point for House Republican leadership, who leaned very heavily on the committee and asked them to pull down this hearing. So, I think this means it might be more than just a delay before we see any final action on this legislation this year, because it will be a difficult impasse to overcome.
And there still aren't any questions in the chat, so I just want to make sure if there are any that they're dropping them in. Otherwise, we can continue moving on. If questions come in, we can come back and answer them too. We won't make everybody sit here in awkward silence until something shows up. So really appreciate those updates, Wes and Heather. Did you have anything else you wanted to add before we move forward?
I think that's it. That's it. We can do it on those issues on the list. So happy to go forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. The next thing I wanted to just touch on is the new overtime regulation. As you are likely aware, last month, the Biden-Harris administration, I guess this was actually in April, the Biden-Harris administration published the final rule raising the salary threshold that must be met for employees to be classified as exempt from overtime requirements. The first increase under this rule, which will raise the salary threshold for overtime exemption to $43,888, is scheduled to go into effect next week on July 1st. Although there is litigation pending, so we are still waiting to see if a judge were to issue an injunction to halt this from taking place. But as of right now, there are no injunctions, so this is scheduled to take effect on Monday. Barring any legal injunctions, the minimum salary amount will increase a second time on January 1st, 2025 to $58,656. And I'm dropping these dollar amounts into the chat along with Independent Sector's public fact sheet about this rule in case you're interested in learning more details about it and how it may impact your organization.
Hey, Travis, if I can just add one thing on that overtime reg issue. There's also a Congressional Review Act bills introduced both in the House and the Senate. The Senate's on a bipartisan basis with Senator Manchin joining some Republicans on that Congressional Review Act. If you recall, the Congressional Review Act allows Congress to issue a resolution that has kind of fast track, some majority status to overturn and to, make void basically any final regulation issued by the administration. And so that resolution has been introduced in the House and the Senate. It could and probably likely will pass if brought up in the House, and could pass also in the Senate, given Senator Manchin's support of the CRA. But if it does pass the House and Senate, it's probably going to be vetoed by President Biden. So not as a threat, but obviously it could be called up later on in the year as well.
Great. Thank you for that additional information, Wes. And again, if anybody has any questions on this or anything else we've talked about, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A. Next, I just wanted to touch on the Fearless Foundation court case. On June 3rd, the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit ruled that the American Alliance for Equal Rights does have standing to sue the Fearless Foundation, an Atlanta-based foundation, claiming that their grant program for Black women entrepreneurs is racially discriminatory. Additionally, the court ruled that the Fearless Foundation grant program must remain halted under a preliminary injunction while the case proceeds through the courts. It is important to note that the June 3rd ruling only addressed the matter of standing and does not settle the merits of the underlying case. In December, Independent Sector, along with the Council on Foundations, filed an amicus brief calling on the court to dismiss the lawsuit and rule in line with the First Amendment that the philanthropy and individuals have a constitutional right to donate to charitable causes that align with their values. IS is continuing to monitor this case and will report updates as it works its way through the judicial process. So that is still working its way through. I know that's not necessarily a major update since this was really ruling on the standing clause and not as much on the merits, but we still just wanted everybody to know that this case is still working its way through. We are still watching this. We did file an amicus brief late last year. So this is something that's on our radar, but there's no concrete ending to this yet. So that's just more of an update of where things are currently. If there are any questions on that, again, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A. And then the last thing that I have that I just wanted to mention was the Giving USA update. Earlier this week, actually on Tuesday, Giving USA published its annual report on philanthropy. As anticipated, this report showed that charitable giving failed to keep pace with inflation in 2023. Dropping 2.1% after adjusting for inflation. This actually marks the second consecutive year that the Giving USA report found a decline in charitable giving. According to the report, charitable giving from individuals dropped 2.4%, and its share of overall giving from individuals continued to decline with a slight decrease to now individual donors are making up 67.2%. Just so for, even though that was a slight drop, I just wanted to give some comparison just for context that in 2023, the same report found that individual donors accounted for 73% of overall giving. So from 2023 to, from 2013 to 2023, it dropped from 73% to 67.2% for the total amounts given from individuals. And although charitable giving levels have not kept up with inflation or returned to pre-COVID levels, the numbers in 2023 are far more encouraging than the steep declines we saw in 2022. I will drop a link in the chat from Indiana University School of Philanthropy, which gives some more details about the numbers that are found in this report. For 2023, there actually were some individual sections of the charitable sector who did actually see bumps in their increases and a couple that saw reductions. The main ones that really stood out were education actually did see a bump in how much they are receiving in charitable contributions. However, I know in 2022, education saw a steep decline in there. So this might just be kind of reverting. This increase might just be kind of justified by its kind of returning to what it was pre-2022. And I know religious organizations saw a bit of a decrease, although most organizations did actually, and international aid organizations also saw a decrease. Other than that, most saw at least a nominal increase this time around. But it is still below pre-pandemic levels. So that is something that we are definitely keeping our eye on. Again, these numbers were all kind of anticipated. We were not expecting this to show anything that it didn't end up showing, but still wanted to make sure everybody's seeing these numbers, knowing what's out there. So you can plan and accordingly, and feel free to ask any questions if you have anything. Boy, I thought this meeting was gonna take longer, but we haven't had any questions yet. Just wanted to open the floor up again for any additional questions or comments from any of our viewers out there. And if we don't have anything, just see if there are any final words from Heather or from Wes.
Yeah, Travis, just want to kind of comment on the Giving USA numbers. Obviously, we go into 2025, there'll be, the sector is going to be, focused on, the non-itemizer deduction, the charitable deduction itself, and so having those numbers around what's happening in the giving space, both in individuals and broadly, are very helpful to kind of show policymakers what's happening in the sector in the real world as people are looking to give. So, helps to make the case and the need for expanded incentives in the tax code to help people to give, especially individuals, right? I mean, what happened in 2017 with the standard deduction being doubled, and we're going to see that again. It's going to expire, go back down, unless they act and keep it back up at the higher double level, is going to, shrink the pool and has shrunk the pool of people who itemize and get the charitable deduction on their tax return. So having a non-itemized reduction, I think, is important policy going ahead and going into the debate for 2025 to kind of work. Members of Congress have talked to them about impact on the sector, the importance of giving more broadly in our economy. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Wes. If there aren't any other questions, I'm happy to give everybody 39 minutes of their Thursday afternoon back. But we just wanted to make sure nobody feels like we're trying to rush everybody out of here, that we do have time for questions if anybody has any. I will also, if you do have any questions about, if you think of any questions later, I'll drop my email in the chat. You can feel free to reach out to me, and I can triage those questions out to Wes or Heather if appropriate. But really happy to be here and be a resource for everybody. So I just dropped my email in the chat. So that's all we have. Really appreciate everybody for taking time out of your day today. And if there are any questions, do feel free to reach out. So thank you.
Thanks, Travis.